Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly for July 2022. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And this month we're going to continue our series of using a cutter with Total Quilter. And in this month's lesson we're going to look at how to take a quilt block and cut those quilt block pieces with your cutter. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with this month's lesson. So what we're going to be talking about this month is how to take a quilt block and export it for your cutter so you can cut out those block pieces digitally on your cutter. Now when you do that, you're going to want to use the rotary cutter tool on your digital cutter, and for more information about that, check back to the May 2022 lesson where we talked about the options for using the rotary cutter attachment on your digital cutter. Before we go ahead and get started, you want to go ahead and open up Total Quilter, or if you have it, FTCU, which will open Total Quilter inside it. And that's what I'm showing you right now because I want to show you how to save. Normally when I do these lessons for you, I open up Total Quilter in what we call demo mode from FTCU, so it just shows me the Total Quilter features. The problem with that is that it does not allow me to save, and I want to show you how to save with this lesson, so I've gone ahead and opened it up in FTCU mode. That shouldn't hopefully be too confusing. The icons are pretty much in the same place. There's just some extras here. So what you also want to do before we get started is you want to set up your ruler so that you're in inches mode. And to do that, what you want to do is bring your cursor and hover it over the ruler bar on the top here. Right click and make sure it's in inches. If it's not, go ahead and click inches and that'll get you into inches mode. All right, and then if you want to use a grid, you can. I have 1/4 inch grid set up here in my grid settings. You can do that or not. Really doesn't particularly matter for this lesson. So in Total Quilter, we have two different kinds of quilt blocks. We have what we call artwork blocks, which are located behind this icon right here under artwork blocks. We also have appliquilt blocks. And you can use either of these to create quilt block pieces for your cutter. The procedure is a little bit different. This month we're going to be talking about how to use the artwork blocks, and next month we'll go over how to use the appliquilt blocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up a block. So I'm going to click this artwork block icon. I'm going to go to my basic blocks here. You can use any blocks you want, but to make this easy, I'm going to go ahead and use the basic blocks. I'm going to pick basic block 16. It has 3 different pieces, so it has 2 triangles that are essentially the same size, and then 1 bigger triangle. Now when this comes in, it's going to be grouped, and the first thing we want to do is ungroup it. There are several different ways to do that. You can right click on it and you can click ungroup. So you could do that. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to click off it. And you could also select it and come up here to the ungroup icon, which is right here. So this would ungroup it. I could click that. The other way you can do it is if you have these little shortcut icons showing, right here is the ungroup icon shortcut. So I'm going to go ahead and click that to ungroup it. Now all my pieces are separate, so I can click one piece and select it, or click this piece and select it, etc. All right, so what we're going to do to cut these is add a seam allowance to them. Now, if I cut them just like this, I won't have any seam allowance. So that's not good for traditional piecing of a block. So the first thing I want to do is I want to separate the pieces, give them some space. So I'm going to click on this yellow triangle and move it over a little bit. And I'm going to click on this blue one and move it over a little bit. And I can go ahead and leave the red one right there. Now the important thing about this is when you separate these pieces, you want to leave enough space between them to account for your seam allowance. So let's just take a look at the tool real quick and see how it works. We'll go ahead and use this yellow block here. You select a piece that you want to do a seam allowance on. Come up here to this tool right here, which is your seam allowance tool, and you click it, and it's going to come up and ask for an amount of the seam allowance, which normally you would be 1/4 inch. If you want to use something else, you can. You can also click Remove Selection. I'm not going to do that right now, mainly so you can see what's going on. What will happen if you click Remove Selection is it's going to create a new object that's a 1/4 inch bigger all the way around, and then take the original one away, which is okay because probably all we care about is the resulting piece. But when you do that, you'll lose the color information that goes along with it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this piece here, and it'll also show you graphically how it creates that new piece. Now the last thing you've got here is whether you want a mitered corner, whether you want a beveled corner, or a round corner. Now you can go ahead and use a round corner if you want. I don't know anybody that actually uses round corners for quilt blocks, but bevel is very popular, and miter is also the standard. So let's go ahead and click miter, and we're going to click OK to see what this tool does. Okay, so I'm going to click OK, and you can see here that now I've got an outline around this quilt block. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Whoops, that was a lot. Let me go up here to my zoom percentage, and let me go to 75%. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so you can see here, I hope you can see this yellow line outside. Let me turn off the grid so it makes it a little easier to see. Okay, so yeah, that's a little easier to see. So here is this yellow outline. This is spaced out exactly a 1/4 of an inch from our original piece. So this outline here is what we would want to cut. Now, just for clarity, let's look and see what the rest of the things of that tool do, rest of the options. So I'm going to click Undo to get rid of that one. I'm going to reselect my piece. I'm going to come back to the Seam Allowance tool, and I'm going to click Bevel instead of Miter. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And what Bevel does is it kind of lops those ends off like that, which a lot of people like. And you can go ahead and leave it like this if you want. You can do anything you want. You could even do rounded. So just for completeness, let's go ahead and look and see what rounded looks like. I'm going to go ahead and click round and click OK. And that's just going to give you a rounded corner here instead of a straight or beveled corner. All right, so let's undo a couple times to get back to where we were beveled. Whoops, I didn't do that. Okay, so let's do this here, and let's go back to a beveled seam allowance. Okay, and so what we would do now is we would take this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and select that piece, and if I want to cut this, I would again use my cut preview to get that onto a brand new screen all by itself, and there's our piece, and it shows us the color, and we could go ahead and cut that out. We would send it to our cutter by doing a file, and then we would do a save as, and we would pick a format for our cutter. Now the default's going to be this WAF file here, and what I would do is usually select an SVG. So that is right here. So I would save it as an SVG to go to all cutters. If I want to take it to a Brother Scan and Cut, I could also select FCM, which is its format, but it also can read SVG files. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click Cancel because I don't really want to save that. Okay, and I'm going to close this window so we can go back to our original design here. So I'm going to do an undo because I'm going to get rid of that outline, and I'm going to undo a couple times to bring my blocks back together. And you might be thinking, well, why can't I do this all at once? And the answer is you can, But if you had them separated, so let's do a redo to re-separate them. If I select them all at the same time by dragging a box around them, and I do a seam allowance, and I'm going to go ahead and use this one, I'll say OK. And when I do all of them, it's going to take that very first color and make them all that color. So that's okay. You can recolor them. So you could just say, for example, select this. Well, see, here's the other issue, is that it creates them as a group. All right. And so it's not really a group. It's one object. And that's not really useful for our purposes. So in order to get this back to individual objects, we have to do a break apart, which is this icon right here. So I'm going to click break apart, and now it broke them apart. So now they're individual objects, so that's okay. But you can see it didn't retain that color information. Again, that's not a fatal flaw because we still have our colors here, so I could select that piece and simply click the color down here to recolor it the color I want. All right, now the color information is just for reference. It really doesn't matter to the cutter. What happens when you cut it is the color of your fabric is what controls the cutter, or the color of the piece, obviously. All right, so that's one problem that happens when you do them all at once. And you certainly can to save some steps. I prefer to do them an individual piece at a time. And another reason I like to do that is because basically this piece is the same as this piece. And so do I have to cut them twice? No, I can just do it once and just change my fabric and cut more pieces. So that's another reason to do them separately. But I just want to show you one other gotcha that you can get into trouble with when you do them together, or if you haven't separated your pieces. So let's say I just want to do an outline of this red triangle. And I come here to my seam allowance and I click bevel and I say OK. And that actually did it just fine. All right, so it made this bevel and didn't interfere with anything. But if I were to do all of them, I'm going to do another undo here. And if I do all of them together, here's what happens. Okay, I'm going to say OK. All right, now it looks like I've got my pieces, but if I actually want to look at them, I pull them apart, and I've actually got kind of a mess right now. So it actually just did one big outline, and it did this little weird thing here with the bevels because of the corners that are intersecting. And so that's not good. So you don't want to do that. So let's undo all of that. Now, what happens if they're separated, but I don't leave enough space? All right, and then I do them all. Okay, and I click my seam allowance tool and say OK. All right, now let's see what we got. Okay, still, if I didn't leave enough space, what happens is that it combines them all together into one thing because it needs enough space. It needs at least the seam allowance space on the outside of each one of these pieces to work correctly. So once again, going back all the way to where we didn't have this problem, the proper way to do it is to select your piece, move it well away from the other pieces, and then if you want to do them all together, you can. But once again, I prefer to click on it and go ahead and do my seam allowance. I'm just going to show you what happens if I click remove selection. I'm going to say OK, and so it took that away, and then I would actually go select it, click my cut preview, and now it retains that color, except it didn't retain the color. In fact, here you don't see I don't have any of the colors again. So I prefer to leave the selection until I get to cut preview. I'll just show you what happens if I do that. I'm going to do an undo, re-click it. I'm going to do my seam allowance. I'm going to leave remove selection unchecked, click OK, And boy, it didn't retain the color information when I did that either. All right, so let me just recolor it, and then we will go to our cut preview. Okay, there we go. All right, and then I would just save this as an SVG or FCM and send it to my cutter. So that completes our lesson for this month. I want to thank you for watching. Invite you to come back next month when we'll do the same thing, but instead of using an artwork block, we'll be using an AppliQuilt block and show you how to do that. So we'll see you next month.